Firstly, I did a bit of research on you, of course.
Okay.
And I noticed back in '87 you were drafted to Essendon with pick 19 and then didn't play a game there. So what happened there? Was it just didn't, or there was a sliding doors moment I saw that for cricket, so did cricket come?
There was, I'll give you the short version, we'll be here all day. But, look, I was a typical country kid in Tassie. I grew up playing cricket, footy. I probably always saw cricket as my more serious sport, I guess you'd call it. Just loved playing footy. And the opportunity came from nowhere, really. I didn't even know that I was being watched by the Bombers. I was actually sitting in a hotel room in Perth at the time when I got told that I'd been drafted, thinking that I was just about to make my cricket debut for Tasmania. And I don't really, in honesty now looking back, I don't think I gave it enough serious consideration. I was probably really in the cricket pathway at that stage and would have happily kept them both going, but it was probably about the time where you had to start to split them up. And I had spent some time with Kevin Sheedy, who was the coach at the time, sort of talking about, if you move to Melbourne, we'll support your cricket, blah, blah, blah. But I never really gave it enough real serious consideration. I think I was always in my head heading off on a cricket pathway and thought that footy could only get in the way. So made the call. Look, I've had many moments where I've looked back and gone, maybe I should have given that a little bit more thought, because I loved footy. I loved playing footy, probably as much, if not more than I loved playing cricket. But cricket probably stamped me a bit earlier than footy, I guess, and therefore I always saw myself heading that way. So I certainly don't look back with regret, but I look back sort of thinking,
what if?
Maybe a bit of what if, but not with regret, no.
Yeah. So I mean, moving on to a bit of your work life and playing career, you played 18 years in Australia and England, made a truckload of runs. But after your career and working in cricket, was it good to get out of the cricket space and into the St Kilda role in footy? Yeah,
look, it was a really conscious choice. I sort of stumbled into an administrative career in sport in many ways. I sort of volunteered my services in a more of a career and welfare space late in my playing career, just talking to mates ultimately about, what are you doing? What if cricket falls over? What are you going to do?
Yeah.
Really struck an interest there, so I studied in that field, and upon retirement left. I had 2 part-time roles in Tassie, one with Tassie Cricket, one with the TIS in Tassie. Headed off to Canberra with the family, working in coach support, with coach education, which was fantastic. Right? So involving yourself in Olympic sports and getting to know some incredibly elite people at a very personal level. So I really loved that.
Yep.
And then in Canberra moved into what was more of a group sport management role leading into the Beijing Olympics. So it was sort of managing a lot of our Olympic programs, or AIS programs, which in some cases doubled as our Olympic programs heading into Beijing. And about that time sort of had an offer to go to Adelaide to run their cricket program over there. So we jumped out of that, back into cricket, dragged the family to Adelaide, and then the opportunity here came up after 6 years in Adelaide. So it's been a fairly serendipitous sort of loop from my perspective, but to be back in football, to be working in Melbourne, I probably always saw myself being in Melbourne at some stage. I sort of circled it and eventually got here. So no, look, I love the game, and I love the industry. It's flat out. It can be pretty exhausting. It's incredibly sharp end as far as performance goes. You're under a pretty big microscope, but that's what gets us going. I get to deal with pretty elite people most of the time. I get to deal with really performance-oriented people that sort of live their lives at the very sharp end. So that gets me going, and that's what I love about the role. You don't have to deal with too many dinglings, to be honest, in these kind of roles. They just don't survive. So it's great from that perspective.
And have there been any distinct differences between the roles of football compared to cricket?
Well, the game aside, that's obvious. There's a different pace around both. I've often said footy has this really fast weekly rhythm, and even this time of year when there's no footy being played, there's trade dominating news, and I think the microscope's a bit stronger over footy. the industry does, the speculation in the industry is significant. In cricket, it's a gentler pace. It's a very different game as far as the skill requirements to excel at it. But at the end of the day, you're still dealing with, in both cases, young people trying to be the best they can be. And I think there's a lot of similarities in that space as far as the choices they have to make, the balance they've got to have in their lives, and what it takes to be great at either one. So, yeah, some differences, but some real similarities as well is with the people you're lucky enough to deal with and the people you're lucky enough to try and influence. So, yeah, it's a bit of both.
Yeah, and so you're the General Manager of Football Performance at St Kilda. What does the role specifically entail?
Yeah, a couple of analogies. One is I basically get the players once they're in the door. So I'm involved in the recruiting and drafting process, but really only take accountability for these guys once they're inside our club. So I manage the coaches, the medical team, the high performance team, the career and welfare team. We've got an administrative team as well. So we've got a staff of almost 35 that sit around, as well as 46 listed players. So they sort of sit under my umbrella, I guess. The role itself, I best explain it if you know those guys that, well, not necessarily guys or girls, but the performers that actually spin those plates. Have you seen how they get a plate spinning here, then they'll go and spin one over here? My role is largely one long meeting, and it's around keeping these plates from falling off their sticks, I suppose. I manage some pretty elite people and some pretty strong personalities that all are expert in their field. And it's about making sure that all these things are balanced and that everyone's getting their time in the sun, I suppose, to influence our program. So that's the bit I love about the program. Yeah. And the role is, I think I've said already, you get to deal with experts. Yeah. So it's in many ways not trying to be the expert in the room. It's not trying to be the smartest person sitting around a table. It's about balancing these opinions and making sure that we're all united and heading the right way.
So recently you would have done exit interviews with a lot of players, even coaches, I suppose. And so how does that process work? Does it take a day, a week, 2 weeks, a month, or...?
Exit them from the club or exit them off on annual leave?
Just, I suppose it's like a review, isn't it? You sit down with them, tell them what they need to do, what they've done well, and then they're off on their holiday or whatever they do from there. So what's the process with that? Yeah,
we have 2 days. The CBA says that basically once the season finishes, you've got 2 days to exit your players, which makes for an incredibly busy couple of days. You've got 46 players, happens literally in this office, where they just all roll through for 15 to 20 minute interviews each, where it's a very quick season review. There's a lot of medical, there's a whole heap of information that comes flooding in, and they of course get an opportunity to give us their views on how the season went. Some of them are quite sterile, some of them are quite involved, some of them are quite detailed. So they're really good conversations. You learn a lot from where your playing group's at, where a lot of individuals are at. Now, some of those meetings have also got a probably slightly harder edge, and some of those exit interviews are exiting forever. Now, that's not fun. That's just the way our business is to a degree. As I said, it lives at a very pointy end, and makes no apologies for that. That it's a tough game that's not for everyone. And our guys come in pretty eyes wide open, understanding that, but it doesn't make it any easier when you do get quite close to guys, when you live with them and you see what they try and invest into being the best they can be. So it makes it a lot harder when you've got to let blokes go through no real fault of their own sometimes. They're just not either quite at the level or the actual industry's a little bit too demanding for their character, and there's an unfortunate reality there, and it's a sad time of year for that reason. But once you move through that, you move into the rhythm of, okay, who's coming in? We live in this constant refreshing type of system that it takes me to get used to, but it is what it is. Yeah.
So with just moving back to the delistings part of it, is that a decision made sort of a week or a few weeks before you actually do the exit interview? So you'd probably sit down with coaches and all that sort of stuff and then analyse and then work out what the goes from there, and then obviously you said it's so hard to sit down with the players and do that. So is that sort of how the process would work?
Yeah, there's no time frame as such. The conversation is quite continuous.
Yep.
It's some of those decisions can literally be made the day before. Some of them might be made a month before. Some of them still haven't been made. Whilst we go through this process, there are still guys that don't know what's happening next year, and that's because we're not quite sure what draft spots we need, what list spots are available. So it's a really complicated time for some guys, just not knowing what's going on. But all we do is try and just be as open as we can and give them as much information as we can as to where they're positioned.
Yeah.
And of course, if someone doesn't have a contract right now, then they can be quite actively trying to source somewhere else to go. I mean, it goes without saying almost, if we can't guarantee them something, then they're quite at liberty to be talking to other clubs.
Yeah.
Now, there aren't many in that situation, but every club would have players in that situation. So it's an uncertain time for some, and it's an uncertain industry for some. It doesn't, when it's just finely tuned around performance, it doesn't provide a lot of guarantees in tenure, which it makes it exciting, but it also means there's a harsh reality in many cases too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And now moving on to recruitment, how heavily involved are you in this process?
I'm heavily involved in the process. I'm not accountable for it as such, and as I said, my role sort of really starts in earnest when the players are already in. But we've got a recruitment list management committee that this time of year meets very regularly. Our list management team are the ones at the pointy end doing the deals, if you like. But there's a slightly broader committee that sort of sits around who do we want, what sort of players do we want, and that comes from a trade perspective, so you're trading in known commodities, if you like, or known players who might want to move clubs, but also in a draft sense, so the kids that are coming into the system. So what we really come from a perspective of what type of player do we want, what sort of attributes you're trying to recruit, and really put a big ring around those guys and try and attract those guys either through trading them into your club or through the draft process, which comes in about a month's time. So once all the trades work through, we take picks to the draft and try and pick the right players, and that's all. There's some anxiety around that because these are 18-year-old young men, so there's a lot about them. Whilst we've been tracking them for 2 or 3 years, there's still a lot about them you don't know when you bring them in. So there's some risk associated, but we employ quite a few people in that space to make sure that risks are mitigated as much as possible.
And with contract talks, how do those conversations usually go, and are you involved in that as well?
Not heavily, no. Again, similar process. We've got a list management committee that will look at our players as they're coming out of contract, and our list manager then picks up that negotiation piece. So the dollars and cents in the argument, or if you like, the real nuts and bolts around the deal, that's mainly his. He'll sort of give us a bit of a framework as to where he thinks it sits. So we agree that A, we want the player, B, we'd like him for a decent term, and C, what's going to cost us. Okay, mate, away you go and get the deal done. So, that'd be the best way to explain it. Again, quite heavily involved, just not really at the sharp end of the conversations that occur between list managers and play managers.
So with you'd be here 5 days, maybe even more days a week at the club.
5 days are good weeks.
Yeah, true. You'd be doing a lot of weekends, I suppose. With the culture, are you heavily involved with that because you do a lot of internal and, well, you could say players are external, I suppose, but do you look at that culture and try and ensure there's a great culture going on for both parties? Yeah,
enormously. I mean, there's a great intangible in football clubs which we call culture, and I often say they're hard to create, but they're easy to break. It's actually a hard thing to get a whole heap of people wired emotionally for their own role to play in this, but actually get everyone on the same page as to where we're going.
Yeah.
And it's probably every sporting team's greatest challenge is to get that happening. Yeah. And it's absolutely one of the key priorities of my role is to keep all these people on the same page and heading in the right direction. It doesn't take much for that to go off the rails. It's quite easy to bust that and break that and not have that heading the way you'd like it to head. And there's probably no real greater intangible piece for success than that bond that can unite people and focus people around a specific cause. Yeah. it is. It's tough, but that's, I'll say it again, it's sort of what makes our industry exciting. If you can get that right, the power that stuff can create can turn into premierships like we've just seen. There's been a lot spoken about the Tigers, how they've just got this right. And they've gone from 13th to first. There's other stuff too, but on the back of this wonderful thing, intangible thing that they've found.
Yep.
It's quite a hard thing to explain, it's quite a hard thing to define, but when you're in it, it's quite easy to feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I heard, you probably can't say too much about this, but there's been talk about St Kilda trying to land a big fish in free agency, whether you're, again, heavily involved with that, but
Yep.
obviously you can't elaborate too much. Would that be fair to say, or is that...
It's okay. I mean, we've been quite open in that space to say that our list progression, our club had a plan going back 5 or 6 years now to go back to the draft and to rebuild through talent. Now, we like what's happened there. We like the talent we've brought in. It hasn't all been at a real high end, but it's building nicely. It's growing up together and it's developing together. We think the complementary piece to that now is some real high-end talent. 1 or 2 players that are superstars of the competition to try and polish us off.
Yeah.
So we will be active in that space this year, next year, and probably the year after that to try and get us, into that premiership space where we want to be. We're openly trying to attract those sort of players, and that's a tough market. You're in the mix with 17 other teams. St Kilda, we're not a big club. We don't have the attraction or the lure of playing at the MCG in front of 70,000 people on a regular basis, which can work for some. But we like to think what we're building is a performance track record of, okay, the Saints have done this the right way. They're on the bottom. They've slowly built their list and their profile. And whilst this year was technically a year where we did slip back a bit on the table, we think actually holding strong or holding our position in a competition as tough as this is actually a good development year for us. So don't get me wrong, I mean, we would like to have played finals this year, but from 9th to 11th we don't see us a big slip. We just think we've held firm and that's okay. But next year we'll be less understanding if we don't take the jump.
Yeah.
And natural talent development might take us there, but we also believe that in order to go all the way, we're going to need some high-end stuff, high-end talent to just take us to the promised land. So, maybe not, but that's been part of our plan, and it remains part of our plan.
So you announced in the role in 2014, and since then, what do you feel has been your biggest achievement in helping the club progress?
My own beliefs, I think, are around largely stability. I think it's a game where there's so much external noise. I mean, it's every week you live and die by what happens on the field, and we often talk about the external noise and the ability to manage the noise and to really keep a sane head and work your way through that. I think I'm naturally wired pretty well in that space. I mean, I've lived in sport since I was a late teenager, so I sort of know a lot of that noise and know what you've got to pay attention to, but what you've just got to shut out and get on with it. At the end of the day, people write what they've got to write. If you play well, you get written up accordingly, and if you don't, then you generally become back page news, and there's a certain reality to that. But you often hear around footy clubs, things are never as good as they seem, they're never as bad as they seem, and that's actually a great truism of sport. You've got to sort of live an emotional stability and not let your emotions sort of ride the way the team's playing, because one thing I do know about human beings is sometimes they let you down. They don't mean to, but they can't always get themselves to the level they need to get to. We've got to understand that and try and help them get to the level regularly. And by being emotional and unstable doesn't necessarily help that. So we're quite a cold industry in some ways, where changes can happen fairly quickly and fairly suddenly. But everything I believe around sport is that it's so hard to get it right, that it works best when you've got an area or an aura of stability around a group, and I think we've been able to generate that pretty well. We haven't changed a lot. We've changed some necessary bits, and we'll always tinker, but I think most people would feel reasonably stable. Yeah.
Just to finish, I reckon put aside finals, like you guys want to play finals obviously in the next few years, but what do you think the club needs to achieve, whether it be on or off the field, moving forward?
Yep. Well, when I joined the club, my CEO was quite open to say that we're a business that was not only on the bottom of the ladder, we're also struggling off field. Our membership wasn't strong. We didn't have a lot of commercial support. And I think over 2.5 years, the business and the football business have both grown hand in hand. And I think that is a focus of our football club, to not only just have on-field success, but also to bring our members on the journey, bring our commercial partners on the journey. And I think we've been pretty good at both. Everything. Growth is inherent when you start from where we started from, but the growth has been pretty consistent. Our performances on field, if you're cynical, you could say, well, when you come from 18th, you're going to always see growth when you get talent in, as that talent develops, which is quite true. But I think both have complemented each other very well, and I think our growth is not only about being a great footy team, it's about being a great footy club. And to actually do that, you need all those pieces coming together, and we're very focused on making sure that one doesn't leave the other behind. Yeah. And I think we're doing it reasonably well. It never quite happens at the pace you want it to happen. It's never quite as smooth as you want it to be, but the growth is definitely there, and we've just got to keep working it. The hard bit's now. The hard bit is jumping from 11th, 9th into 4th, 3rd, 1st. That's when you start fishing in the big pools. That's when you've really got to start to take care of every little detail. So that's exciting. We've done a lot of grunt work as a business and as a team. It's now time to actually start looking to, in a business sense, they call it that good to great leap. What's our great piece? That's what we come to work every day trying to figure out.
All right, perfect. Well, that's about it from us. Thanks for that, Tony. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
No worries. Easy.